well, in this drawing, I denoted the notion of smell to show that something's cooking. I had a different change of cloud to denote puffs of smoke, and then I had pies falling out from the top to show that the pies were being made from this particular kitchen. Okay, great. And yeah, so that sets the base setting for the color. So from the line work to the color into, thank you, Blessing. Into the proposal here. So you can see that this is about adding the key element to this drawing, which is about the chandeliers as part of this highway, about lighting up this high street. And it's more about the architecture that starts to really inform the proposal. So here you see inspiration from Leeds Town Hall. So it's about this notion of accessing local needs. And then here the architecture takes inspiration from the spires in Oxford. It's about this notion of knowledge. And this is what this kind of Tectonic really embraces and encapsulates. And you can really see that by also drawing in inhabitants and people, because you can have a crowd of people surrounding certain speakers. So this is very inspired by like Speaker's Corner and those notions of those ladders. You can also have one person listen to one person's view or a very scarce amount. So giving a drawing space and knowing when to really fill it up is also important in the placement of people, and also in the placement of your architecture and spaces. And you can see a very busy high street down the middle, and also people dancing, listening, speaking, etc. And so you can see that this sets the base of the proposal. This kind of sets the mood and the tonal quality and what kind of architecture I wanted to put into context. So I've got the housing, the high street, this sort of urban ring, and another tectonic in the background with everything set into context, which you'll see if the portfolio was ever shown with the master plan. And then you really embellish this with the proposal here. So this is this drawing, and I don't know if anyone has any particular questions about this drawing before I move on to the next.
There is one by Blessing. He says, due to the flat color used, why did you opt to use Photoshop instead of Illustrator, which can be scaled?
The flat color, why did I use Illustrator? Why did I use Photoshop instead of Illustrator?
Yeah.
I don't actually have a particular reason or answer for that. I just I guess I was comfortable in Photoshop and the use of it, that I just went straight in, and I thought everything else can be worked through that program.
Yeah, I mean, if I would quickly add to that as well, I think using Illustrator for a drawing this size and this detailed, it would be a very, very heavy file just from a technical standpoint, because Illustrator is using vectors. I think if you're using Photoshop and you're just coming in with the raster pixels of the color, you're going to be using a lot less memory. And if I'm not mistaken, Eric, these drawings are elephant size, aren't they? Which is bigger than A0.
Yeah, thanks for the Hamza. Yeah, they are extremely large. They're in real life, they're a quad elephant size. That's what they call it, the paper type, and it's it's like 1.3 meters by about 1 meter in size. So if I zoom in, hopefully, you start to see some of the details and the additional moments in it. So there is a layer of hatch. There is tonal qualities that you add back on in terms of shadow and depth to a person, shadow on the ground, additional hatch moments, different shades of color, people. So when you really zoom in, you can see the additional embellishments to the drawing. Let it to be confetti to celebrate, to denote the notion of celebration, or light particles floating up, because these are solar collectors. And yeah, I think all the little details really count towards that.
Definitely. And with this level of detail, just to kind of make that point emphasized, using Illustrator would just be impossible in terms of the file size.
Yeah, because the amount of lines in it, like you mentioned, is and the size of the paper makes it very heavy. Agreed.
Aria Williams asks Eric, what do you mean by tectonic?
Oh, tectonic is just defining the architectures that I've developed in the proposal. So I'll call this chandelier piece a tectonic development in my proposal, and so would this piece, and so would this piece, and so would the housing in the background.
Brilliant. Do carry on.
Thank you. So moving on, this is just another example of another drawing here. So you can see the line work is very scarce. There's not much of it, and there's not much in the ground. But what I really wanted to express was the underside of this tectonic piece, which is the gardener, which you can see kind of looks like an aristocrat with its shoulder pads and the drape. And the reason why I chose this view was because I wanted to focus on the ground level and to focus on the activity down below. But also I wanted to embrace the context of the master plan, showing that these are the rest of the architectures and so on and so forth along this mound, which I'll explain very shortly. But you can see the clarity in the line that it's very simple models. You can see that they're attaching moments into the mound, and everything else gets added into Photoshop, surprisingly. This is about setting the tonal quality of it. So I wanted it to have this very summery green vibe to it. And I wanted to focus on the foreground and the ground level of the greenery, the topiary, and the garden. So this was much about the garden. And this title of this drawing is called New Hyde Park. And here you can start to see that I've started to draw in these very more organic moments compared to the very stiff and scarce model, and started to really go, okay, this is the tonal quality I wanted to embrace. These are the greens and these are the warm colors within this proposal.
Eric, how do you get your color palette for a vision like this? Is it trial and error, or do you have a set color palette that you kind of specified beforehand?
That's a really good question. I think that with color in particular, I think color is quite hard sometimes to use and to do, but it was definitely a turning point in my proposal because it was the one key thing that was raised in my crit, that color can be used very specifically to highlight certain aspects of your proposal, to give it a richer layer. And the way I chose color was that I started to look at key references that I really enjoyed, that I really loved, and also relevant references that really helped to inform the proposal. Not particular to this drawing, I have another drawing that I really referenced the colors by Lowry, who did amazing paintings of sort of British landscapes, and he romanticized that. And I kind of used that color and borrowed from him to really evoke that in one of my other drawings. But this one here, I borrowed from cinematographers, from graphic artists, illustrators that really had a good grasp on color. And I think it's not just about what colors you choose. I also think it's about the proportion of color you give to a page, because a drawing that has 90% green, 10% red is completely different to a drawing that has 90% red, 10% green, right?
Awesome.
Thank you. So going from line to creating the mood, this is the drawing, and
Nice.
also purely in Photoshop. So this is about really embracing the activities that exist within the proposal. Also adding in all of the flora and fauna that exists within the city, wherever they're growing strawberries or raspberries, or wherever the topiaries are cut up. You add your shade, your shadow, the activities that are happening in and around it, wherever pies are being made, or what sort of animals exist in and around. This is a very local Mancunian goat in Isle of Man. And yeah, so I think it's also about adding those small details, such as a lining of pie logos underneath the cake to denote that this is what this Tectonic produces and makes. Because the reason why I denoted that, and people go, "Oh, actually, Eric is a pie in the sky drawing," but I really wanted to focus on the ground view, but I didn't want to take away from the fact that this particular piece of architecture also produced pies and also has a kitchen within it, where the kitchen exists up here. And you can see the chimney here. And to denote that it's a kitchen, we'd, well, in this drawing, I denoted the notion of smell to show that something's cooking. I had a different change of cloud to denote puffs of smoke. And then I had pies falling out from the top to show that the pies were being made from this particular kitchen. So that despite, moments where this might look like fluff or additional things just to embellish the drawing, they're actually, to a degree, a fair level of information that I wanted the reader to look at and to think about, even down to the detail of, yes, they are pies, but where is the pie made? So this is the logo of the Isle of Man, but also here the pie is shaped in the British flag, so that there's very small details here and there that sort of suggest certain things, and then you have dotted lines over here to suggest that these sort of graze this sort of mountain of food. And then you've also got here that music is being played in this city, and that's also being expressed. So sound, smell, flora, fauna, all the intangible moments can also be expressed in the drawing, which I feel really adds a different layer to a proposal and to what you're trying to tell in your narrative. And also variation and variety. So I didn't use the same topiary twice or three times. Occasionally there are drawings that using the same thing over and over again gives a different layer and depth. But here I want to show that people are still trimming the topiary, and then there's the notion and wit of the queen. So there's also a bit of humor and wit in the drawing as well. Before I move on, is there any questions that's been asked, or should I answer any that's
Yeah,
been
there's
coming through?
quite a lot of questions. I think what we'll do is the ones that are a bit more generic, we'll ask because they're all amazing questions. We can ask some of them at the end, but on this particular drawing, there was one on characters. It says, yeah, so how do you get people that fit the exact perspective of the drawing? Did you draw them yourself?
So the characters are very much borrowed from. So I think the use of people is very particular to the type of project you might develop. So my project was very much to do with the United Kingdom and the UK and Britain, and so I wanted to borrow from British artists and illustrators and graphic designers. So these characters are very much borrowed from them and in the spirit of that kind of wit, such as Heath Robinson, etc. So these characters were then traced over and placed back in. And yes, there are moments where they might not seem like they fit the drawing, or they do, and you do have to manipulate that in Photoshop. And then that's how the characters were chosen, defined, and shaped. And you can always, borrow different stances and actions of different people from Google, and then trace them over yourself, and still be able to keep it in the spirit of that kind of drawing style.
Definitely. Thanks, Widuri. I'll also add, Eric, there's an amazing thing we used to do at university where if you're trying to do a very specific pose for a character, but you can't find it on Google, sometimes the best thing to do is just do the pose yourself, get someone to take a photo of you, or get your friend to do a pose and take a photo of them and trace that. And you can end up with some super unique characters that way.
Yeah, no, most definitely. Or even 3D people on whatever platform you're using, whether it's Enscape or SketchUp or the Warehouse or wherever it might be. There are people in different positions. Although it's a very mesh model, you can always use that as a base to trace over as well.
Yeah.
So should I move on?
Yep.
So as you can see, this next drawing is also very sparse. There's nothing much on it or to it. But I wanted the foreground to be about this post box. And in the background, you can very much see the high street, one of the drawings I spoke about earlier, with the chandeliers, the very first drawing I spoke about. And then you can also see the mountain, which I spoke about in the previous drawing, to do with the garden, New Hyde Park. And you probably wouldn't notice this in this drawing because it's such a simple model in that sense. But it's about, how do you really use your model to the best of your ability, and what do you want to highlight? So I think when you're defining a drawing, you need to think about what you're trying to say and what's important to your story and your narrative to express in a series of drawings, because you can't always capture everything in one. So the focus here is very much the post box. And this kind of tectonic is very much to do with sending all the resources that was collected in the city, from the solar energy in the first drawing to the food and the fruits and everything in the previous drawing, and to send it back to the rest of the United Kingdom, to the rest of the capital cities. That was what I wanted to demonstrate in this drawing. Towards the end of the day, So there's two things that kind of start to define the color of this: the color of the postbox being red, and the idea of being the end of the day being sunset. So very much in my head, I had this very sunset ready feel to the drawing, which I wanted to define. And that's the kind of the mood I set. And this was the base for that drawing. So you've got a very sharp, hard red at the bit front, and then it kind of fades out towards the back into a sort of distant sunset. And here you can see the focus is on the mailbox and the people inside it. And then the following bit is about actually, how is this stuff collected and brought to these mailboxes, and where do they get sent back to? How is that really expressed in this drawing? Like the idea of sending something back to the rest of the United Kingdom. And this is the build up of the drawing. So this is very much a mixture of what happens in the city, mixed with a sort of conceptual, metaphoric representation of what it does. So it's adding a level of impossibility to it, but still expressing the narrative very clearly, and also adding like just a level of humor to it. So compared to the last drawing, you can see that the poor postman is very lonely. But if we zoom in, we will see that he now has a series of picture frames. He's collecting his letters. He's sorting his letters. He's got a little window to look out, and inside is actually a small scaled down model of this mail cannon tower back here. And in it, these are some of my early portfolio sheets that really express the Tectonic. So this was within the portfolio, developing the architecture and plan and section and what it does and how it's inhabited and et cetera, et cetera. And this was another early drawing expressing sort of toolkit to provide for the city. And then here, there's very specific emails, addresses in which this is going to be sent back to. The places it's going to be sent back to. So I've kind of just highlighted key icons such as St. Paul's Cathedral, which everyone kind of can identify with, and then also the Samson and Goliath cranes in Belfast. So these were key icons that I borrowed from in terms of developing some of this architecture, and to suggest it in the background. They're not in its geographical place location, but they are there to suggest that this is the place that everything here collected goes back to. So it's a metaphorical piece of information that adds another layer to this narrative. Same with the letters and the seals, and also the guards on paper planes flying back is also a metaphorical representation. But also,
can we zoom into the guards flying on the paper planes? I love this.
But I also wanted to add another little detail. The project is called Cohesion, and the position I took in the proposal is, what if cities are united? Because the brief that year was about resilient cities and what makes a city resilient. So even adding a small detail such as paper men holding hands, it's the notion of togetherness, of cohesion and unity, and that's also something I wanted to lightly express in some way, shape, or form very briefly into the drawing.
Let's get closer to the paper plane, guys. Sorry, I really want to see this close up.
I'm not sure how much closer we're going to get, but let's not get too close, right?
Love it.
But yeah, so I think it's about adding that level of detail to your narrative and story to really express certain things. So here you can see that they have the guards carrying pies and clean water, and it's being checked before it gets taken up the mail cannons and sent back. Oh, sorry. And then you see the rest of the tectonics in the background. You see the houses, the high street, the guard gates, and the cannons are the main thing in this composition, which is why the base drawing, if I go back, you can see that being the focus, and then it's about defining that tone of quality, and then adding all the layers of information that add to the story. And I think those are the only 3 drawings that I would like to talk about today before my time runs out, because Hamza will share some of his amazing work coming up as well. So can't wait to see that.
Nothing
And
compared
then,
to this.
but yeah, that's me for now. Hopefully perfectly on time.